Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's good to be back.
Today, we are trying to strip away everything you think you know about the Aztecs. I mean, take that popular image, the blood, the gold, all that stuff, and just sort of set it aside for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at the actual mechanics of divinity. How does a hummingbird become a war god?
Right. Or how does a piece of sharp volcanic glass become the soul of the world?
Exactly. And we're going to explore this terrifyingly logical bargain at the heart of their religion, this idea that the gods aren't just watching us, but that they are actually starving without us.
It's a complete inversion of how most of us think about religion. We're not looking at a moral code handed down from on high. We're looking at a survival manual written in blood.
The engine under the hood of an empire. And to get there, our source is Louis Spence's The Gods of Mexico. But, before we dive in, we have to set the stage. The mission for today is really to change our definition of the word God.
That's the key. To get the Aztec pantheon, you have to stop thinking of them as gods in that Western Greco-Roman sense. These aren't just figures on a cloud throwing lightning bolts because they're angry or jealous.
So, what are they then?
Spence argues we have to see them as evolved fetishes.
Okay, let's unpack that word fetish. It has a lot of modern baggage.
Right, purely in the anthropological sense. We're talking about natural objects, natural forces, rain, corn, deer, obsidian, that have a spirit or a power. The Aztec pantheon is basically a collection of these forces that over centuries grew personalities.
So it's like a rain cult that just happened to build an empire.
That's a perfect way to put it. It started as a rain cult.
That makes them sound less like deities and more like natural laws you can negotiate with.
Exactly. And that negotiation starts with the most primal human need, food.
Which brings us to our first segment,
Mm-hmm.
the origins of the divine. Spence calls it gods from nature. Where does this actually begin?
It starts with hunger. I mean, before the Nahua peoples were the Aztecs. Before Tenochtitlan, they were nomadic hunters. And when you're a hunter, your theology is incredibly simple.
You worship what you eat.
You worship what you eat. You worship the great deer.
The great deer.
The idea is that there's a sort of an archetype, a great deer spirit that controls all the physical deer out in the forest. If you respect him, he sends the smaller deer for you to eat. If you offend him, you starve.
So the god is literally the food source.
Yes. Take the god Mixcoatl. Later on in the Aztec pantheon, he's this big cloud serpent, a god of lightning and storms. But if you trace him back, as Spence does, he starts as a deer god for the Chichimex hunters.
Wait, how do you get from a deer to a lightning storm? That feels like a massive jump.
It is, but it's a logical one based on, their economy. As these people settle down and begin farming, the hunter becomes less important than the farmer. But you don't just fire your old god.
You give him the job.
You give him a promotion. The hunter needs the deer, but what does the farmer need more than anything?
Rain.
Amen.
Storm.
So the great deer evolves into the cloud serpent. The god's attributes change to fit the survival needs of the people. The core mechanic, though, that stayed the same.
And before we get to that mechanic, sorry to jump in, but I just want to quickly say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep doing these deep dives.
It certainly does. So that core mechanic, the fundamental theology is a Latin phrase, do ut des.
I give that you may give.
Correct. And this is where the Western mind really trips up. We're so used to the idea of an omnipotent God. A God who might want your prayers, but he doesn't need them to exist. He's self-sufficient.
Right. The battery never runs out.
In Mexico, the gods were not self-sufficient. They were dependent. They were hungry.
And this is where the logic gets, grim.
To their way of thinking, rain equals blood. They're the same vital fluid. Rain keeps the earth alive. Blood keeps an animal alive. So if you want the gods to give you rain, which keeps humans alive,
then humans have to give the gods blood to keep them alive.
It's a closed loop, a terrifying, binding contract. If they stopped sacrificing, it wasn't about punishment in an afterlife. They genuinely believed the gods would starve, the sun would physically go out, and the universe would end.
That raises the stakes quite a bit. It's not religion anymore, it's cosmic survival.
Exactly. And that survival anxiety bleeds into how they saw their highest gods, which is where we see some really interesting theological ideas about God itself.
Let's talk about the big one, Quetzalcoatl.
The smoking mirror.
Spence has some incredible details on him. We usually see him as this, terrifying, all-powerful figure. But his origin story, like Mixcoatl's, starts with a physical object, a rock.
A very specific rock, obsidian. volcanic glass.
Okay, so connect the dots for me.
Where?
How does a shiny black stone become the god of justice and the soul of the world?
Well, think what obsidian was to them. Before metal, it was the sharpest thing on earth. It was the knife that skinned the deer. It was the weapon that killed the enemy. It was the magical tool of survival.
So it starts as a survival tool, just like the deer god.
But obsidian has another quality. If you polish it, it becomes a mirror. And sorcerers use these polished obsidian slabs for scrying, for seeing visions of the future. So now the stone isn't just the thing that takes life, it's the thing that reveals truth.
The smoking mirror, that's where the name comes from.
Yes. The smoke is the haziness of the future before the vision clears. And here's where it gets really interesting. Tezcatlipoca evolved so much that he started to absorb the other gods. Spence notes he was becoming abstract. He was called He Who Is Everywhere.
That sounds almost monotheistic.
That's the fascinating part. Spence argues that Mexican religion was actually drifting toward a kind of monotheism before the Spanish arrived. Tezcatlipoca was becoming the supreme, singular, invisible deity, the arbiter of fate.
So if things had gone differently, we might have seen an Aztec monotheism centered on an abstract obsidian spirit.
It's very possible. You see that pattern elsewhere. Yahweh starts as a storm god and becomes the only god. Tezcatlipoca was on that same path. He was becoming the soul of the world.
But he wasn't the only one at the top. He had a rival.
Huitzilopochtli,
Ah, the unpronounceable one, the war god.
the hummingbird on the left.
This one always got me. You have a war god, the guy who demands thousands of hearts, and his symbol is a hummingbird. It seems like a branding mistake.
It does to us. But look at the biology.
Okay, lay it on me.
Huitzilopochtli started as a fetish of the hummingbird itself, or maybe the maguey plant where they live. Now, what does a hummingbird do?
It drinks nectar, it hovers.
It fertilizes flowers. It moves pollen around so life can continue. Now remember, the dos de contract, rain is blood. The war god, then, is the ultimate fertilizer, just as the hummingbird fertilizes the flower.
The war god fertilizes the earth with blood to keep the sun rising. Wow.
So war isn't just for conquest. In their worldview, it's an agricultural necessity.
There's that specific myth Spence recounts, the mother goddess, Coatlicue.
Yes, the Earth Mother. She's sweeping a temple, a ball of feathers falls from the sky, she tucks it in her dress, and she gets pregnant.
With Huitzilopochtli.
Who is born fully armed. He immediately slays his sister, the moon, and his brothers, the stars, to protect his mother.
Which is a solar myth, right? The sun rising and chasing away the night.
Exactly. But that hummingbird war god name really highlights their logic. A tiny, beautiful bird representing the most violent act of cosmic sustenance imaginable.
It flips the script on how we see their cruelty. It wasn't sadism, it was a desperate kind of gardening.
That is a very good way to put it. Desperate gardening. Which really leads us to the core of the whole religion. We get distracted by the war god and the mirror god, but Spence argues that underneath it all, this is fundamentally a rain cult.
And that brings us to Tlaloc.
The oldest god of them all. Tlaloc was worshipped in Mexico long, long before the Aztecs even arrived.
He's the one with the fangs and the goggle eyes, right?
That's him, and Spence makes a strong point here. All the sun worship, all the war, it's secondary. It's a means to an end.
And the end is rain.
The end is rain. If it doesn't rain, the corn dies, everyone dies. Tlaloc is the basic reality of their existence.
This also changes how we see Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He's usually the good guy in this story, the one who didn't want human sacrifice.
That's the legend. But let's demystify him for a second. Climatologically, what is Quetzalcoatl?
Spence says he represents the trade winds.
Exactly. The winds that sweep across the plateau right before the rainy season, they literally sweep the road for the rain gods. So Quetzalcoatl isn't just a magic snake. He's the atmospheric precursor to Tlaloc.
So when the myth says Quetzalcoatl was bewitched and driven out of Mexico by Tezcatlipoca,
That's just the science of myth in action. The trade winds Quetzalcoatl fail, and the scorching sun and drought Tezcatlipoca take over. The conflict between the gods is a weather report.
it's the story of the changing seasons. The good god leaves because the dry season arrives. It's not a moral failure, it's just meteorology.
Everything comes back to the earth and the cycle of growth, which I think brings us to maybe the most misunderstood and gruesome figure in the whole pantheon.
Jipotec, our Lord the Flayed. This is the part that makes people cringe. The priests would. Well, they'd skin a captive and wear the skin. It sounds like something from a horror movie.
It is visceral horror, no doubt. But if we just stop at the horror, we miss the entire point. We have to ask why.
Okay, so why?
Think about a seed of corn Before it can sprout, what happens to the outer husk?
It bursts open, it peels back.
It's flayed. The dead skin of the seed has to rot away so the living green sprout can emerge. Zikpe-Totec is the god of spring, of planting.
So the ritual, the priest wearing the skin.
The skin represents the husk of the old corn, or the dry, dead vegetation of winter. When the priest puts it on, he's symbolizing the dead earth. When he bursts out of it or when it falls away, that symbolizes the living earth bursting forth.
It's a ritual of renewal.
It is. Gruesome to us, but to them it was a ritual of hope. The only way to ensure that spring would actually happen.
It's that survival instinct again. It's not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It's agricultural symbolism taken to its most extreme conclusion.
And that extreme nature comes from their view of the universe itself, their cosmogony, how they saw creation and the end of the world. And this is where we need to talk about, of all things, atheism.
Atheism. In a world with thousands of gods, that seems like a contradiction.
It does, but bear with me. We tend to define God as the creator, the uncaused cause, the being that stood outside of nothingness and said, "Let there be light."
Right, creation from nothing, ex nihilo.
But Spence points out a fascinating detail. The Mexicans didn't really have that myth. To them, the universe space, which they called Omeocon, it always existed. Matter always existed.
So the gods didn't create the building blocks.
No. The gods just ordered them. They struggled against chaos to organize it. This implies a very different hierarchy. If the gods didn't create the universe, they aren't its masters.
They're just inhabitants, like us.
Exactly. Powerful inhabitants, yes, but still subject to the laws of decay. They're fighting to keep the lights on just as much as humanity is.
That sounds terrifyingly lonely. It's a universe of constant flux, not a stable creation watched over by a benevolent father who guarantees the outcome.
It's a dying fire that needs constant fuel. And you see this reflected in their doctrine of the suns.
The ages of the world.
Yes. The belief that the world had already been created and destroyed multiple times.
Spence lists them. The water sun, destroyed by floods. The wind sun by hurricanes. The fire rain sun.
And we are living in the motion sun Naui Olin.
Destined to be destroyed by earthquakes.
By motion, earthquakes. I mean, they lived in a volcanic region. They knew the ground beneath their feet wasn't stable.
So this functional atheism, this lack of a supreme creator, it actually explains the desperation of the rituals. If there's no omnipotent father guaranteeing the world will last forever.
Then it's up to you to keep it going.
Which brings us right back to the beginning. The starvation. The universe is a machine running out of gas.
And humanity is the fuel pump.
So, what does this all mean for us? Why should we care about the theology of a civilization that vanished 500 years ago?
Well, if you step back and look at the whole picture Spence paints, it's a lesson in how environment dictates belief.
Geography is destiny.
In a land of drought, rain is God. In a land of volcanoes, the earth is unstable. In a land where survival is a constant struggle, the gods are hungry. The horrific parts of their religion, the blood, the flaying, they weren't invented because they were evil people.
They were invented because they were terrified people in a terrifying environment. They looked at the sun and didn't see a guaranteed sunrise. They saw a fire that was flickering.
And they loved their world enough to pay the ultimate price to keep it burning. It recontextualizes the violence. It wasn't hate. It was a heavy burden of responsibility.
It really does. It's been a fascinating journey, from the hunter's deer to the farmer's rain to this almost existential dread of a universe without a creator.
It shows that even the most alien-seeming beliefs have a rational internal logic if you dig deep enough.
And that is what we try to do here.
Indeed.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've talked about the horror of the obsidian knife. We look at it and we see murder. But the Aztec looked at the sun and saw a dying fire that only they could keep alive.
So here's the question to mull over. If you truly believed, I mean with 100% certainty, that the sun would go out tomorrow and all life would end unless you used that knife, would you be the hero who wields it to save the world? Or would you be the atheist who refuses and lets the universe die?
That's a heavy one to end on. Thank you for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.